Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. We are right at the top of the hour. We are going to start here shortly, but we want to give folks just another minute or two to have the opportunity to join, and then we'll get started. All right, we are right at 2 minutes after the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, especially on a Friday. We appreciate you all being here. So, we are going to be talking about how to use Microsoft Copilot with your different workflows and how to start integrating it. And we'll actually get some hands on experience today as well. So, if you're able to follow along, I highly encourage you to do so and hopefully we can find a few tips and tricks to save you some time. You may have noticed we are recording today's session, and I do just want to note that the automatic recording link that will populate in the meeting chat likely won't work for you. So we will be following up afterwards with more information on the slides that we're showing today and the recording if you're interested. So just note that it's not an error on your end. That is kind of the expected behavior we anticipate to see. So we're going to focus today on the commercial and enterprise experience of Copilot, and we're going to be looking at the unlicensed version. So if you do have a license, there are additional features that you can access, but we won't be discussing those today. Now, by way of introduction, my name is Larissa Cunningham. I am a learning strategist on the Evolve 365 team at Planet Technologies. And I've had the amazing opportunity of working with a number of organizations as they've successfully implemented and adopted Copilot into their workflows and seen some really incredible changes and improvements. So my goal today is to really simplify this process for you and give you some real examples for where this might start to benefit you and hopefully inspire some ways this can help you on a day-to-day basis. So we do have a great group of people here from Planet as well. So if you have questions throughout our session today, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or put those questions in the chat and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. So with that being said, our agenda today is to simply cover that quick overview of what AI expectations we have, what Microsoft Copilot is. We'll get into the navigation and then start to look at some of those different features and do some experimenting with prompting and some of the different tips and tricks you can try. So with that being said, I do just want to start out and talk about some safety and things to keep in mind. So not unique to Copilot specifically, but most of the large language models that are making AI a buzzword are helping with a lot of similar capabilities like summarizing lengthy documents, helping you create different writing and professional content. But it's really important to emphasize that when we're working and using AI for any of our um, any of our work-related tasks, we need to make sure that they are approved AI web services. When we don't, it can risk exposing either personal, confidential, or proprietary data to the public that we didn't mean to. So the good news is, with Copilot being built into the Microsoft suite, you already have enterprise data protection when you're signed in with your work account. So you should be safe with the Copilot features that we're going to talk about today. But if you are interested in any of the other tools, just keep that in mind and make sure they're approved with your organization. So generally speaking, any AI generative tool is going to have two main characteristics I really want to call out because they make a huge impact on your experience. So the first is hallucinations. Hallucinations are a term that essentially mean Copilot or AI can generate really convincing but actually inaccurate or incorrect responses. The way these tools work are based off of pattern recognition and what they're trained on, and sometimes, depending on how we've prompted it or if there are ambiguous assumptions from the tool itself, it might not fully align with the accuracy level that you expect. So it's really important that we remember that Copilot is a really helpful assistant, but it's not a source of truth. So we always want to validate the outputs. You are still a critical part of this process. You're the expert in your field, and you know your topics and your subjects better than anyone else. So we want to use it as that tool to enhance our efforts, but not replace our oversight of the process. The other piece here is going to be simply change. We've all seen softwares rapidly evolve, and AI seems to be surpassing the speed of any of those changes. So we're constantly seeing changes and improvements and new features coming through. So what we experience and showcase today will actually be the least advanced you ever use. And the reason I bring this up is that it's important for all of us, if we want to leverage this as a tool, to take on a growth mindset and be willing to experiment and adapt with the tool as it changes. Now, more specifically focusing on Copilot, I want to emphasize how it works with your data and what it can do. And I know this is a huge area a lot of people have a concern with. So I do want to emphasize that when you're signed in with your organization's credentials, you should automatically receive enterprise data protection. And what that means is that it is functioning on and with the same security that the rest of your documents and resources internally do. So these are required to meet a certain standard of that security, and it's included and works within that system. So I will say some of your conversations will be saved in a personal history. So there is a personal element there that does go away after a period of time, and it is personally exclusive to you. So nobody else is accessing that. No one else is seeing it. And the most important part is none of your chats or your documents that you share in those chats are going to be used to actually train the AI models. So you will get updates with the general development, but you will not be training the model with your information, which means all of your data staying protected. All right, so it looks like a number of us are pretty familiar, so hopefully none of this is new, but I just want to make sure we're all starting off on the same page. Just to dive a little bit deeper into the security commitments and kind of going into this, I know sometimes when we say commercial or enterprise environments, sometimes that's confusing. So I just want to call out, if your organization's in retail or healthcare, finance, private sector, higher education, or things like that, you're likely in an enterprise environment. If any of you are joining and you're from a government agency or you're a contractor in that regard, there might be a different cloud environment you're using. So the reason I call that out is just because certain features aren't available at the same time for both environments. So what we'll be looking at today is that enterprise or commercial experience. And like I said, this is all working inside your existing Microsoft 365 trust boundaries. So your emails that are already safe, your Teams chats, SharePoint sites, it's adding on to that existing structure. All right, so I know most of us are more eager to just get started and start looking at the features. So when we go to log in for the first time or get there via the web, you are just going to go to m365.cloud.microsoft, and you can put in the /chat, but usually that first part will actually get you to the home sign-in experience, and we'll log in with those organization credentials. So when we do that, really what we're going to be looking for is that when we're on this chat section of our navigation, we should see a green shield icon. And that's what tells us we have that enterprise data protection active and working for our conversations, so nothing's training the model. So before we get into my demonstration for today, I want to talk a little bit about one of the biggest holdups a lot of people find with trying to implement Copilot. And really the biggest distinction is that most of us are so used to going to search engines and trying to take a really big thought or idea and condense it into 4 or 5 keywords so that we can pull up relevant sources and then start to work through that. Copilot completely changes that experience, and it takes it from trying to remove context, and we're actually trying to add information here. So rather than reducing how much you're saying, adding in more information about what's going on, what you're trying to achieve, key details and constraints, all of that's going to benefit your conversation, and they're contextual. So it will take into account everything you've told it from previous prompts, as well as its responses into the next element of feedback it gives you. So it's a completely new workflow that is a little different to get used to, and it takes a little bit of time to get that muscle engaged, I suppose. So once we do that, though, we're able to do quite a bit. Couple of other additional things I want to call out about Copilot is we are using those most advanced models. We are using GPT-4 and GPT-5 and DALL-E 3 for images, and it's consistently advancing. So as progress comes through with those different models and options, there are quite a bit that are being incorporated into your Copilot experience. Source transparency is a huge element of what we're going to look at today as well. So typically, Copilot will automatically produce its sources and cite them within the response it gives you. If it ever doesn't, feel free to ask for that. Send a follow-up prompt in your conversation and say, cite your sources, tell me where you got this information. And it will provide that usually in links, and we can go through and verify that source. Now, when your organization allows for web search to be enabled with your experience, I believe most of us will see that. It allows us to also not have a knowledge cutoff. So we're able to search real-time information across the internet as well as any of the foundational information it was trained on. And last but not least, because it's so important, we're using Copilot because of that data protection. So yes, there are other tools that do some really cool things, but not all of them guarantee that your conversations are encrypted and secure and that they don't train the AI model. All right, so once we get comfortable with that, it's really as simple as entering your prompt, making sure you check and validate those sources, and ask follow-up questions to continue the conversation and build upon that progress. So I do think this all makes a little more sense when we look at it in real time. So I am going to come over here to a demonstration environment and we're going to take a look. So I'm starting here from that link that I put in the chat. You should be able to get here as well. The first thing I'll call out is when we want to double check, our profile icon is down here in the left corner, and it should say your name. If we click on it, will also tell us the email and account that we're signed in with. Make sure that you're in your organization's account. And then up here in the top right corner, we should see that little shield. And if we hover over it, it says Enterprise Data Protection. So that's how we can confirm we're good to talk about those internal elements without exposing anything. So just to go over a couple of navigational things, there might be other areas you can access Copilot. And as a note, sometimes people see just this chat experience. If you're looking for that left navigation, look for this little box icon, and it should expand a navigation on the left-hand side where we can navigate through some of our other options here. So we have a new chat, we can create different things, and our chat history will be listed down here. These are just the most recent chats we've had. So my most recent chat will show up here, and we can actually click all chats if we want to explore in more depth or search for any of the other specific chats that we've had and get back into the context we've already built. So I do want to get us started here quickly. So I want to share a chat here in the, a prompt here in the chats. And I do have a section where you can actually change some information. So I want it to just act as a friendly creativity coach and help me come up with some playful but professional team superpowers. So if you want to change this detail in here and say what your role is at your organization, I'm going to say Planet Technologies, and we're going to say learning strategist here. And apologies, that always gets in the way. Okay, so once you've customized this piece, we're just going to send it off and start to see how it responds, and we'll point out a couple other navigational features. So pretty quickly here, it came back and said, okay, with that information, here's a friendly response. It's very, very kind and chatty. And then it gave me a table. So I have some cool superpower names, the idea accelerator, and this is how Copilot can help with that. Now I gave it some constraints in here where I said I just wanted a single sentence. And so it did keep that in mind and didn't go beyond what I requested. So this isn't pulling from any outside sources, so there aren't any links to reference. And as I scroll down, it's going to give me some suggestions in the response as well for what it could do next. So it does already start to encourage and inspire you for how it can help you. Now, I mentioned earlier that these are contextual conversations, so we can continue the conversation with our own ideas and our own prompts, but we also have some suggestions up here based on the content we're already talking about. So in this case, because I asked for those ideas, it's saying, do you want me to make a visual slide or some superhero cards and things like that? These are going to change every conversation and every prompt that you give. I will also point out that as we've started here, if you're still looking for inspiration, there is a prompt gallery we can use. So this little icon right at the edge of those suggestions will pull up a broader prompt gallery. You can filter by the task or job type you're trying to get inspiration for. And as we scroll through these, if you find one that you want to keep or use in the future, go ahead and hover over this bookmark icon and click that to save your prompt. What that will do is actually put it here in the Your Prompts tab and make it easier for you to use that in the future. All right, so hopefully that gets us started. If you want a different one that might help get even more inspiration, I'll add an additional prompt you can try just to start to get ideas and brainstorm with Copilot. But before we get into any further elements in here, let's point out a couple of other things. So here in our chat, up at the very top, this auto button here is determining how in depth and how far Copilot will reason. So by default, it's usually on auto, where it will look at your prompt and decide if it's one that needs a little bit longer of a processing time or if it can give me a quick response right away. If you know that you just want a quick response or that you do want it to take a little bit longer to reason over more information, you can select one of these for your preference here. And there might be a drop down here as well where you can actually choose versions with additional elements, but they're still kind of based on how much Copilot's going to reason over at that time. Now, the other thing here is super important. This is your new chat icon right next to that auto button. This is what we want to use anytime we're changing topics. One of the benefits is that it keeps in mind all of our previous prompts and responses. So if I drastically change the topic in the middle of a conversation, you're likely going to get a compilation of topics you didn't intend to. So the best practice for a number of reasons is to start a new chat anytime you're changing that topic. This will also help you with your chat history so that you can get back into the right conversation if you need to. There is a dropdown as well right next to that, which allows a temporary chat. So if you use this experience, it will not save your chat into your history. So make sure that you take anything away from that when you're in the chat because it won't save that for you to return to later. All right, and so I am going to hit this new chat just to highlight two more things. And that is down here at the bottom. We have some suggestions before we even get started. So this will look different for everyone. It typically depends on your more recent activity. And if you want to see more, there is an expand area down here. And at the very bottom of that, we can also get to our prompt gallery. So this is that same experience we saw in the chat, just a different way of getting there. All right, so before we start to get into more specific examples, I want to talk a little bit about context engineering, which is how we're effectively engaging with Copilot. So context engineering is really just a fancy term for the mindset we're going to take on when we're prompting Copilot. So if you've heard of prompt engineering, it's essentially an elevated version of that. One of the best parallels I've heard is comparing Copilot to an overeager intern who really doesn't want to pester you with a lot of questions, but they also don't want to return empty-handed. They want to show you how good they are. So if we take on that mindset and treat Copilot like it's a new team member or an intern, it allows us to think through all of the details they might need. So they might not have all the background assumptions or understanding of our internal workflows. And that's now something we need to give them information for so that they can complete the task accurately. So this is where we think about making sure they have clear instructions, the relevant information and access, and then we give them all of the expectations. Who are we writing this for? What are we expecting to come back? All of those kind of details. It's also where we want to help them understand where to pull information from appropriately and where not to pull information from. So if you have specific documents you only want to resource, let's add those to that boundary. And if you have specific things you don't want to use, let's specify that as well. So what actually makes an effective prompt is often going to depend a little bit on your circumstance, but some of the main themes are going to be really specific and detailed. Using full sentences with instructions is going to help, and adding in those details like your tone, your purpose, any formatting expectations, all of that is going to be helpful. So in the example we see on the screen, we're recapping an article, but we've said, okay, we want to recap the findings here. I've copied it below, so we've added in the information. And we want you to include the top 3 concerns. So I'm setting an expectation for what it's going to give me back. Now provide the answer in 2 or 3 paragraphs and use a business tone. You can imagine that if I give that prompt, I will get a drastically different response than if I use the example on the right side where we just say, hey, summarize this news article about this company. That second one is vague. It only uses a few words, and we're going to get a response. It's just not going to be as tailored and unique to you as you need. So ultimately, there is no wrong way to prompt. Using your natural language and talking to it like a colleague is very welcome, and experimenting is the best way to get you comfortable and understanding what kind of results return different responses. So I've mentioned a couple of these a few times, but I do want to bring it all together and give you some specifics to actually add into your prompt and think through to give you a higher quality experience. So the first is going to be, let's give our Copilot a role or a character to assume. This gives it an initial idea for what kind of data sources to pull from, and it completely changes the way we approach the task. So if I'm responding to something as an expert in a field, it's very different than if I'm a new hire or if I'm an executive. These are all different approaches to that same task. The second is the task itself. I would argue, this is the most important part, because if we don't clearly state what we're actually expecting the tool to return, we're not as likely to get it back. So what are we wanting? Are we wanting a quick summary? Are we wanting just an answer to a question? Or are we actually generating a list of things or a report? All of these are different ultimate results. Now, really closely tied to the task itself is the format we want that response in. So if I want a summary, do I want it in 5 bullet points or do I want it in 3 paragraphs? Are we looking for a table with 5 columns with these specific elements included, or are we actually creating a full report? What do these things look like? So any specifics we can give to that format are going to help improve and customize that response. We also want to take into consideration who will be using the information we're creating. So not only do we have a unique approach depending on our persona, but we're also going to word things differently depending on if it's a casual message to our team versus a polished message for executives or something that's going out to the broader public. And last but not least, tone. This is something that can be overlooked or oversimplified, in my opinion. We can say things like formal or direct or professional, and those are great. But we as humans often have multiple tones we're layering together in our true interactions. So are we being formal and humorous and also direct? Let's layer multiple tones together and really make it our own. I will say, if you don't include this initially, you can always send a follow-up response, but my goal is to save you as much time as possible. So the fewer prompts you have to send to get your results, the better. So if we put all of this together, it might look something like this for you. And I'm actually going to put this here in the chat in case anyone wants to keep this as inspiration for when you're putting together prompts. This is just a baseline to help you start thinking through that. Often I will think through this process and then add a whole paragraph more of information and context and story. But at least from here, even if you change just one of these elements, you'll get a totally different result. So for example, if we take a look at a marketing team, we could have them act as a brand manager, develop a comprehensive social media strategy that's going to be a PowerPoint, and we're aiming at young entrepreneurs and so forth. Any one of these elements will completely adjust the response your AI tool is going to give you. So with all of that being said, I think that's a lot of information. Let's go ahead and actually try it together. But I want to emphasize, I just unfortunately don't have enough time to show you every type of experience you could go for. So what's here on the screen is just to inspire the various different ways we can start to engage and incorporate Copilot. All right, so I'm going to come back over here to my chat experience, and we're going to take on a scenario and say that I am part of an HR team. And we recently sent out a engagement survey, and I need to actually go through this and start to give feedback to our leadership and follow up from there. So I'm going to give it a persona of an HR business partner, and I'm going to tell it its task is creating an executive summary. And I'll send this off so that let's go ahead and see. I spelled some things wrong. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to send this off. While it's processing, we can just take a quicker look. I'm identifying some themes here. I want to keep it anonymized. That's really important. And I'm giving it a couple of specific tasks and even some constraints. So here I said I want it under 300 words. And I even asked it to walk me through the reasoning process to make sure that it uses that as part of the context for what it responds in. So it responded pretty quickly here. And I noticed one other thing that could be beneficial to you all. If you write a really beneficial prompt, you can save those too. So you don't just have to save the ones that were pre-written. Maybe you're going to use this again. If you hover over the prompt in your chat, you should see that same bookmark icon. And if you save it, it will go to the same location we looked at earlier in that prompt gallery. So I'm going to scroll down here. It's giving me some feedback. Here is its high-level reasoning summary so that it took that into consideration, and then it gave me those top 5 themes. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is I didn't actually attach the document that I wanted. So a lot of this might not actually be unique to me. So let's try that one more time, and we're going to start a new chat. We're going to go ahead and hit paste because I don't want it to take in any of the incorrect information. And this is where we can start adding multiple documents if we want to, but we're going to look for this little plus icon at the bottom of our text area. You can upload them directly from your device, but if they're already saved into a cloud location, we can grant Copilot access in this instance to pull that up. So let's go ahead. Sometimes it kind of disappears on my screen here. So let's go ahead and try that again. All right, so this is the survey I'm looking for. I'm going to go ahead and attach it. So we want this to be part of the response and what it's assuming. So this is a really critical element for how it's going to respond, because before it didn't have all of the appropriate information to give me a truly customized feedback. It's also why it responded so quickly, because you'll notice here, this one's taking a little bit longer, and I'm actually getting the option to get a quick answer. So it is thinking deeper right now. Just in the interest of time, I will go ahead and select Get Quick Answer. But for you, if you were going through this, I would recommend just doing another task and coming back to it so that it has more opportunity to do a better job. All right, so it gave me that same high-level reasoning, and it is kind of going over some more specifics. And you can see already this is very different than that first response we got. So now it's telling me as I go through this, these were the 5 themes from employee comments, and this is grounded strictly in the uploaded file, which is now also linked here as well. So this is what I mean when I say that it does bring in automatic citations with its responses when it's referencing certain information. So if I ever want to double check it, I can click on this. It will open in a new tab, and I can review and confirm that we have the right data. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom, of course, as an individual, I'm going to read through all of this. But since this is a sample, I just want to showcase all of the different pieces it did follow through with. So we even have our under 300 words summary for our leadership. So at this point, at the very bottom, if you had multiple sources, it's going to reference those throughout the response. And at the very end, it will give you a full list of citations. So if you're searching on the web as well, this is really important to look at and make sure it's pulling from sources you're okay and approve of. Most of the time, though, we're creating information that we need to turn into a larger process, or it's going to be used elsewhere. And so just having this here in my chat isn't going to do me a ton of benefit. So I have a couple options down here at the bottom where I can copy this response. I could paste it into Word or a OneNote or anything like that. It will take everything from its most recent feedback and put that in there. But one of my favorite features is the ability to edit in Pages. If you haven't played with Pages before, this is a really flexible workspace. And what's going to happen is I'm going to click on this little pencil icon. It's going to give me a split screen view. And again, it'll take everything from my feedback here and turn it into a page. So this is flexible. It has a lot of different pre-formatted tools like tables. You can actually incorporate things like task lists and things like that. And this is something we can share. And it offers a lot of flexibility with the way you collaborate. So by default in here, it looks like it didn't give me a title. So it pulled from my prompt initially. And I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and change that so I can find this easier. Employee engagement feedback. So I'm renaming this just so that I know more what I'm looking at. And then down here, I have all of those pieces of feedback, including the conversational element. So I might delete that portion because I don't need to keep that, but I can keep going through here. And I should even see any links. Let's see up here. Oh, it actually didn't give me the link this time. Normally the links do transfer over into this portion, but it looks like it didn't do that in this case. So just kind of what we can do here, and then I can continue the conversation. Maybe I need to create a manager discussion guide, or I can choose from these suggestions. I can now continue my conversation with Copilot and edit and fine tune the response it gave me so that it's perfect or polished for my team to actually collaborate on. So this kind of pulls quite a bit through, and we can now save this, share it, turn it into a Word document if we want to. There's a lot of options here. So it created a guide here for me, added it to my page. And as you keep going in here, you should see this little plus icon. So if there are future responses in your chat that you want to add to this page, it will simply take it to the very end of your existing information and add it in there. So it makes it really easy to save this as documentation and start moving forward with an actionable path. So if I close this and I want to get to it later or in a different chat, there is an option. You'll notice this plus icon changed. This drop-down arrow allows me to open recent pages, and I can actually search through those if I have quite a few, or click on them if it immediately shows up. Now, there are likely going to be instances where you need to get to it outside of your chat. So from the home area, I'm going to click on new chat up here. From here, you should see on your left navigation this library icon. That library icon is where your pages are going to be stored. We can create brand new pages from here if you want to start from scratch and start putting together some ideas and brainstorming. So we can start here. We can get back into our information that we started to create and have a full screen view rather than that split screen with the chat. But we do still have a chat option if we want to turn it into a full conversation. All right, I do want to pause here. I know we've gone over a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, perfect. So one of the other big benefits I want to highlight, and it is a little bit hidden, is one of my favorite ways to customize your Copilot experience is giving it custom instructions for you so that you don't always have to give the same context over and over again. So if we come up to this top area where we saw our new chat and our auto options, you should see a 3-dot menu. And when we open this, we can get to recent pages here. But I'm actually looking for the settings icon. So when I open that, it opens a pop-up over here, and on the left navigation of this pop-up, I should see personalization. In this experience, we can then click Edit Instructions, and these instructions act as a permanent prompt and permanent context that we're giving Copilot to always have no matter how many new conversations we start. So in this example, I said, okay, I'm an HR business partner. This is who I work with. I frequently need to do these things. And I added a whole bunch of information about my preferred tone, my style and structure, and you can add quite a bit here. So when you start to add these, it takes that into consideration before it responds to your newest prompt. And I just want to showcase how different these can be. So I have a different persona over here. I'm going to come back to that same area in my settings. And in this case, in our personalization, if we click edit instructions, this is a project or program manager. These are the types of things they usually need. And so it gives a whole different structure to what we're looking at. So I'm actually going to use the exact same prompt twice and see how different these responses are. So this is our project manager persona, and I'm going to say, I'm just trying to plan for work next week, help suggest some simple weekly plans with priorities and so forth. So this is just kind of a sample idea here. Maybe I'm just trying to get some brainstorming ideas, and I'm going to pull back over here to my HR persona and do the exact same thing. So we'll send both of those off and let me come back to our project manager and let's see what it came up with. So starting off right away, it's giving me a really focused idea. It's looking at the next week, so March 2nd, and it's giving me, all right, so we need to do kickoff and alignment. We have to look at stakeholder decisions, execution and risk burn down, all of those kinds of things, which fit pretty in line with a project manager's focus areas. And it's looking at things like vendor syncs and leadership touch points. So if I now go back here, let's see how it responded to our HR person. So in this case, it tailored them to my HRBP priorities. And these are very different. We're looking at performance and calibration readiness, and we're aligning it with our HR peers. So I didn't do anything different with this prompt. All I did was add those custom instructions that were unique to me. I do see a question in the chat for cutting and pasting some of these. It's definitely just a guide point, but let me go ahead and add that in. So, whoops, not there. It is a little bit long, so please excuse that when it comes through, but I will go ahead and click on this. And we're going to come in here, copy and paste. Now, again, this is just a starting point. You can add a lot more or take away from anything that's in there, but some things to consider adding in. All right. So with all of that kind of being said, I do just want to pause with some of these different things. Are there any other questions that have come up or that you are hoping to have addressed today while we still have a little bit of time left? All right, perfect. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and give us one more scenario and then close out with some ideas and tips and tricks to try with your prompting. So I'm now going to switch gears just a little bit. We looked at a human resources scenario, but let's go ahead and say I'm actually a financial analyst. I do still have those custom instructions, but maybe there is a scenario where I'm helping out with this financial analyst. And so I'm going to go ahead and give that context to Copilot. So I'll go ahead and add that in here. I'm going to give it that persona now so it knows what's important for this conversation. And we're looking to review some Q2 financial briefings for our executives. So I'm giving it some specifics. I want a 5-row table, and these are the specific topics I want in each column. And since we're giving it to our executives, I want it to be executive ready and concise. Now, one thing I will add in here as well is when we add our content, I've shown you how to add it from our cloud files. If you upload it directly from your device, it will go to your OneDrive because that's what Copilot needs in order to access and reason over this. So what will happen is in your OneDrive files, you're going to see if it loads, you're going to see a newly created file that happens in the background called Microsoft Copilot chat files. So if you upload those, is where it will go in your OneDrive. so that you can actually leverage it in those conversations. Now, mine is in here, so let's go. Well, that shortcut didn't work for me. Let's try that again. We're going to add our work files, and I'm going to pull in this financial report. So we're going to go ahead and send that off and see what happens here. So it actually pulled through pretty quickly. And it's just looking at Q2, even though I have a lot more data here in those years. So I let it know what we were focusing on. And then again, here you're seeing this pop up a number of different times. So one tip that I'll give you is as you read through this and you go, okay, this all sounds accurate. This sounds familiar. I'm double checking and clicking on this link. Once you're happy with that response, if this was something I wanted to actually share with my leadership, if I copy it, I'm going to get all of those links and those citations. So one thing that we might do instead is actually say, this is great. Please give me the table without citations. You can say that a number of different ways, but ultimately I'm just asking to regenerate that information in a little bit of a cleaner format so that I don't have to individually go remove those citations when I go to share it with leadership. So from here, this is the exact same table as what we had up here. It's just that I can double check the information directly in that response. So once I'm happy with that, that is one of the tips that I'll do to easily clean up some of the feedback that I'm getting. And then, of course, let's continue this and say, okay, we've taken on that mindset, but now I need to actually create a communication. So let's actually take this from a communication specialist standpoint. And so it's really helpful in approaching the multiple hats many of us have to wear. And all we have to do is just let it know which hat we're wearing. So I'm going to have it be a communication specialist now so that we can share an internal notice and kind of give people an update. So you'll notice here that because this is a communication, it's giving me some suggestions. I will say, I know I couldn't go into it in detail, but one of the custom instructions I have is to give me multiple options. If we're brainstorming together, I always want multiple ideas. So it's giving me several suggestions and saying, these are some ideas for how you can title this communication. And then it's actually writing out the full element here. So again, if I actually wanted to use this, I would probably, after I confirm, I would probably say, okay, rewrite without those citations. But they're very crucial in that initial response so that we can make sure we're still in the loop and confirming the data it's pulling and that it's not saying anything that it just made up. All right. So with the last few minutes that we have, I just want to share a couple of prompting tips and tricks that you can add in. You can add these together, but they're really helpful in getting some different perspectives. So one of my favorite things, you saw this a little bit in the icebreaker I shared, but one of my favorite things is sometimes we do a great job of pulling all of the information we can think of together. And then I will actually ask it to ask me questions for any context it doesn't have or to better tailor its results. I have done this both personally and professionally, and I'm always really happy with the way the conversation goes because it usually gives me ideas or assumptions I didn't realize were being made. And so this is one of my favorite things to do is rather than start off and get my immediate results, I'll say, hold on, ask me some questions. The other thing, and you just saw me do this as well, but if we're brainstorming with Copilot, I pretty much always ask for multiple ideas, even when I'm only going to walk away with one, because what will happen is I'll have my ideas, I'll see what Copilot gives me, and then I'll piece some of my ideas and some of the various different things that came through with Copilot, and I'll pull them together in a way that feels good for me. So I very rarely take exactly what Copilot gave me, but it gets me 80 to 95% of the way there. Asking it to show your work, this can be kind of tricky depending on the context, but ultimately what we're doing is offering this opportunity for Copilot to The way these generate, they kind of come through word by word. And so it's predicting the next word, but every word it gives you becomes part of the context it's considering when it gives the next word. And if that sounded weird, essentially what I'm trying to say is that when we require the tool we're using to quote unquote walk us through its thought process, it's forced to decide what that thought process is and then make sure it actually adheres to that. So this can be a really helpful way to help create that context. And it also helps us if we're not getting the results we wanted, maybe understand where we're getting tripped up and what we need to change in future prompts for that conversation. It can also be really helpful to do an FAQ. This is not going to be actual questions asked unless you're providing that data, but it will anticipate some questions from maybe a policy document or whatever source you're giving it. So sometimes it's a lot easier to read something in a question and answer format than the full technical language of a formal document. Couple of additional things you can do, especially if you're still getting started, I highly recommend just having Copilot and AI help you write your prompts. So if you're trying to do data analysis and you want a better prompt for what you're trying to do, tell that story to Copilot and then say, help me create a really high quality prompt to do this. And in fact, I would actually recommend adding in, give me multiple options of a high quality prompt. And then you can see various different ways you can start to approach that and pull together what feels best for your circumstance. Asking clarifying question kind of goes hand in hand with asking me more questions, but this can be really helpful, especially if you're analyzing data. So sometimes I will say, if you don't have the appropriate information, please tell me if you're making assumptions or if any of my information is ambiguous. And so it gives that opportunity for it to ask you questions because otherwise it's inherently trained not to. So like I said, that overeager intern doesn't want to pester you unless we give it permission to ask those questions. And then last but not least, turning large tasks into smaller tasks can be a really beneficial way of pulling some of these workflows together. I know many of us have maybe seen people who have these mega prompts that are really, really long, and those have their place, but sometimes it is better to take it one step at a time and start with one document and then make sure that everything looks accurate. And then we layer in another piece of information and take it a step further. And we're still saving time, but you're getting more oversight in the experience. So ultimately, it all comes down to practicing and making sure that you're testing out these features and seeing what works best for you. We want to focus on progress, not perfection. So I know this is a very new element for many of us, and hopefully we've been able to decode some of the mystery around some of this, but please let us know if there are other questions that you have. If your organization is launching Copilot or needing any assistance with that, we have helped a number of different teams do this and roll it out very successfully. So please feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can do at Planet to help you and your teams. But otherwise, I do want to save some time here for any questions that you came in with that we didn't get a chance to answer or that have come up and you'd like to see again.